I'm going to choose this. This is how I always begin. It begins with me muttering to myself. And I believe we are now live. So hello, interwebs. It is I, Hewlett, David Hewlett, with another I'm with Genius. And today, very excited because it's always a good sign when there's an Expanse poster in the background. We've got Geoff Smith from Specto Natura. We are going to talk about observing Earth from space and the deluge of satellite data, which is just, as you say, it's one thing to have that data. It's like what to do with it once you get it. It seems to be the mystery. Do you want to sort of walk people through what you do and what you're, just the basics on what you're doing?
Yeah, so I'm an Earth observation consultant is my name. So I work with satellite imagery, and I actually spend most of my job actually helping people when they're designing maps or validating them. And so I kind of help at that kind of specification stage, and then usually hand it over to someone else to do the actual map production. So I work mainly on land monitoring and mainly in Europe. So although I have had experiences in other parts of the world, but yeah, sort of producing that sort of underlying information, that sort of data that then helps drive other processes, like whether they be habitat restoration or landscape changes, forestry, agriculture, all those kind of things. So that kind of background information I help to produce.
You raise an interesting thing I had never thought of before. You're saying you look mainly at Europe. But surely the planet is the planet, right? It's all the same stuff. Are there different rules and regulations and stuff you've got to deal with? Like, why would you?
Well, there's certainly different legislation in Europe.
Yeah.
So the European Commission, and I'm in the UK, so I'm not really part of.
Oh, that's right. Yeah.
Political Europe. At the moment,
we won't go there, will we? Yeah.
No, but each country globally will have its own land legislation and regulations. Some of it filters down from international bodies. But the reason I just work mainly on Europe is because I'm very familiar with the landscape types here.
Right.
So as everyone can imagine, as you move around the globe, you get different biomes and different habitat and ecosystem combinations appearing. So we don't have too much tropical forest in Europe, and
yet give it some time.
Yeah, that's right. Or deserts.
Yeah, well, that too.
We focus mainly on the habitats and landscape types that are present in the European continent.
We had a great chat earlier on before. Like, we like to do a little pre-chat before we do this, just so everyone knows what kind of an idiot they're dealing with when they do this thing. So, Agne, thank you as always, has organized this, and I'd love her for it. It's amazing how the people she gets. But one of the things we were talking about that really stuck with me was this idea of paper map mentality that you talked about. You know, and would you run that through for me again? Because it's such a great, it applies to so many different aspects, I think, of technology. So.
Yeah. I mean, I don't know if I quite coined the phrase, but
doesn't matter. It does. Yeah.
It's a kind of change from in the past where we had to actually print everything out, almost the sort of pre-screen era. So if you wanted a map, you went to a bookstore or a map provider, and you'd give them some location, and they'd take the sheet down that covered that specific location, and there'd be hard lines drawn on the map, and blocks of land would be coloured with different colours that meant different things, whether it's forestry, water, wetlands, or something like that. And then you take it away, and effectively that was fixed in time for you. That wouldn't change. And you were, well, it would say on the map somewhere, but that was already out of date information because landscapes are changing constantly. New urban areas are developing, forestry is cut down, etc., etc. So we got into this world of thinking that there was sort of almost like one layer of information, and it was relatively fixed in time.
Right.
But now with satellite images and digital databases, we can have all those map features can be completely dynamic. Each time in my case, each time a satellite image comes over, I can update the information on each of those features. So if part of a woodland has been felled, then I can add that information to that woodland object. Or if it's disappeared completely and been converted to agriculture, then we can take that woodland away. And
you can see the condos popping up all around the cities and stuff. Is that?
Yeah, completely. Yeah. I mean, there's a great animation that I think NASA produced, or the USGS, of Las Vegas and how that has grown over time, and that is that's an amazing animation of a time series of satellite images.
Because it was literally just a desert. I mean, there was just nothing there. They just randomly decided that was it, right? I mean,
yeah, I think that was the 40s or something,
Yeah,
when it kind of
yeah.
1940s. So yeah, and satellite imagery kind of goes back to the sort of 70s, early 70s. So you're starting to capture a lot of that development cycle for those areas. Satellite imagery.
I love the idea because there was always at school, but back in my day, there was always a permanence to those maps. The maps always felt like, well, that's what it is. Like well, there it is, and also there was a definite sense of organization to it. It always felt it seemed like we took something that was so random and wild and crazy, and then just forced it into these little shapes. And you're saying that now, because of the data, they're all like they should be moving. I mean,
yeah, completely. And when we think of what you might call the semi-natural landscape, where there's less boundaries, etc., you often get grading between habitats. They're called ecotones. So, for a good example is when you climb a mountain, that the forest starts to die out as you get higher and higher toward beyond what's called the tree line. But that's not a hard line in. It's not someone's not chalked there on the ground and then they don't put any trees the other side of it. It's because of the ecological controls that are placed on the growth of trees. But these things sort of fade in and out. And when you look from a conservation point of view, these boundaries, these ecotones, are where the real rich habitats are for biodiversity, because species often want a mix of different plant species, habitat structures, etc., to thrive. So they're really important areas, but we often draw a really hard line when we're making a paper map and say, okay, trees one side, no trees on the other side.
Well, that's what I love about this paper map mentality thing, because we've applied that even to agriculture too, haven't we? Like, I mean, it's like we've decided, like, oh, we need corn, great, we're going to just do fields and fields of corn and destroy any diversity that was there that we're now discovering is actually really important to sustain our existence.
Completely.
Yeah, it's
so the hedgerows or the field margins or headlands, depending on what you want to call them. That's where all the pollinators live. That's where all the things that eat pests live, etc. So if you take those away, then you have to then put much more intensive management onto your crops in order to get the same kind of yields out.
And what kind of satellites? I mean, you talk about there's been satellites up there for ages now. What is the sort of progression that they've gone through? I mean, what are they seeing now that they weren't seeing before? I mean, when the first satellites went up, what were they using to look back on Earth?
Well, the first ones, I think we mentioned this before, was the sort of reconnaissance or spy satellites, which actually use film, analog film.
Yeah. Oh my God, that's right. I forgot about this. Yeah, that's right.
The people listening are aware of that. So when images used to be collected on film, very much like reconnaissance aircraft in the Second World War, where they'd put a camera in the base of a plane and just take photographs. So this satellite effectively had a camera in it, and then when all of the film was used up, then it would be the film would be parachuted back into the atmosphere and then collected by an aircraft flying in.
That's insane. It's so funny because I guess we probably grew up in a time when video was just, television was there and video was just, I guess video was back, it was in our teens, wasn't it, that it sort of started showing up for people. But
it's still analog as well then. So.
And it was still analog, exactly, right? So they'd still have to send tapes and stuff. Whereas now everything's digital, we just take that for granted. Okay, so they're literally dumping film from the sky. Wow. But that was mainly military stuff. That wasn't Earth observation stuff, other than
not really. Then because they're having to target specific places to take the pictures, and you wouldn't get the kind of whole country mapping that we need for more kind of land management type applications.
You were saying Kodak was the company that was doing that for them? Or?
Yeah. Apparently they got the contract for supplying space film, I guess you would call it. Yeah. But I guess it must have had to be tolerant to the environment in space in order to take the images and return them. It was slightly before the start of my career, so
right, yes.
But I mean, there's some great. You often see examples now because the archive. It's called the Corona Archive, and that's been opened up now.
Oh,
so
what's
it's
that?
No longer secret. And so you can go back and look at these Corona photos.
Oh, wow.
Corona was the sort of program that these spy satellites use.
So that's all public access now?
Yeah, it's online somewhere.
Oh, that's
it's in
cool.
the back. Not
Someone will
recently.
find it. You wait. Someone in the chat will find it, I'm sure. Hello, everyone. By the way, I'm afraid, we were just talking about this with Geoff. I feel like, as much as I want to talk to everyone, it's just, I want to focus on our I'm with Genius guests. So Agne is going to pick out some questions and she will email them to us, and we will answer those in a bit. But right now I want to get my nerdy grip in here. Okay, what's interesting about that as well is the again, your paper map mentality. Kodak was so on the cutting edge to be creating film that worked in space, that could be dropped out of satellites to planes and stuff, but they didn't see digital coming.
Yeah, no, that's right. Yeah.
Or tried to. Well, I suppose it's that innovator's dilemma thing too, where they didn't want to, cannibalize their own. But at the same time, you go like, oh my gosh, like look at a company that's so forward thinking that it's thinking, how do we get film to work in space? Doesn't think, digital. It makes a lot more sense. So,
yeah, definitely. It's come a long way from that point. So
okay,
so only 60 years or something.
Well, that's it. Yeah, it's like the film industry. I mean, literally, the film industry, the same thing. People forget that we've only had film since the 19 whatever the hell it was. It feels like it's been here forever. So you go from dropping canisters of film. I guess then we go to sort of like radio frequency stuff. What's the next sort of jump?
Yeah, well, they had the next various sorts of scanners. So rather than take a picture as a single frame, you would have some kind of scanning mechanism, or they used to call them push brooms because they would go along collecting a row of pixels at a time as if you were pushing a broom across the surface of the Earth. So various digital approaches, whereas I think now the majority of systems use a CCD, a two-dimensional CCD to collect the sort of two-dimensional images. And then everything is sent down digitally now rather than analog, and then having to be converted into digital numbers.
And Agne had a good question about this. How is that sent? Like, is it like microwave, or is it how do they, or radio? Is it still radio, or?
It is radio. It's one particular. I think it might be X-band. Maybe.
Oh, really? So it's got its own right.
Yeah,
right.
Someone in the chat can tell me. There's various communication networks. And some satellites now, rather than directly send information down, they send it through a relay satellite. So there's a network of relay satellites up, because you're not always in view of a ground station.
Right.
So some satellites would record images and then download them when they went over a ground station. Others would only be sending down continuously. So as this push broom effect, as this strip of imagery was collected, it would be sent down automatically, and if there was a ground station there, they'd be able to collect it.
Right.
Excuse me. But now it's a lot more complicated, and so imagery can be collected, held on satellites. The data storage is much better nowadays, or it can be sent through these relay satellites.
It's got to be huge. I mean, the amount of data has got to be insane.
Phenomenal. I mean, petabytes is the...
Yeah. But petabytes, like, on a weekly basis, like, or whatever. I mean, like, what is that? And is there... God, how do you back that up? I mean,
that's beyond my pay grade.
Yeah, really.
We do rely on cloud computing and cloud storage now to handle all this stuff. In the past, they used to go into archives and be written off to tape.
That's still just other people's computers, though. Like, that's still, the cloud is just still someone else's, problem.
But huge server farms there where you can handle the redundancy, etc., of storing huge amounts of data.
So the stuff that you're working with, before I'm going to take you back and get you to talk about how you got into all this, but so the stuff you're working with now, are you dealing with petabytes of data? Like, do you have to have like some monster system for yourself, or you could just pull it off the cloud and it's?
No, I kind of work a lot on the cloud now. So there's various systems that are set up to hold different imagery from different satellite systems. So in Europe we have the Copernicus program, which is the European Union's sort of Earth observation program, and as well as they have satellites in space, and then they have infrastructure to store that data, and a certain number of platforms which you can then serve it out, depending on whether you want to access the data just as an image on your screen, or you want to sort of programmatically go in and process the data through another service.
So when you get when you get like a gig, when you get like a consulting gig doing this stuff, what kind of thing are you doing? Like, is there an example that you could do without sort of giving anything away that you shouldn't? Or
Yeah, well, often we find that there'll be some kind of environmental issue. So there's an example in the UK where there was some waste dumping
right.
that was unknown and was kind of identified by the local people, and then they complained and nothing happened. And then so I've now got hold of some information, and I can now track when you can see the waste dumping happening over
You
time,
mean like on a
etc.
large industrial scale type waste dumping, or
Yeah. It was hectares of or acres of
people still think they can
rubbish.
do that? Like, don't they know?
Well, I mean, they don't know that the spy in the sky boys are still up there, and girls, sorry, looking down at what's going on the surface.
Wow, boy. Okay, everyone, get your tinfoil hats out because you're being watched. Okay. The next question, which I always have, is I can't imagine as a kid going like, space, the final frontier. Let's point it all at the Earth. It's so counterintuitive to what you think of when you think of space. Like, I mean, look at your fabulous expanse backdrop and stuff like that. How did it come that you turned that space observation into Earth observation? Is that how it works?
Kind of. I started off being a geographer, and then I went to go into sort of environmental sciences and geophysics, which is kind of observing under the ground, so to speak. So
wow! So you were like a rock lover before before all of this.
For a while, and then the oil price crashed.
Right.
And they weren't taking on explorationists, so I had to do something else. But I'd always had this interest in satellites and space and satellite imagery, and
it's kind of hard not to, isn't it? I mean, I can't imagine not finding it cool that there are these things whipping around the planet, just checking everything out. It's
the first project I did was actually to look at one of Jupiter's moons.
Oh, right. Yes, that's right.
Ganymede, which is famous from The Expanse.
Yes.
So this was back in the sort of 80s.
Right.
And I looked at some Voyager 2 data for a project. And then I was able to map the sort of surface structure of some little segments of Ganymede to sort of identify the geophysical and geological processes going on there.
And so what kind of data were you getting from that you had to work with? I mean, what were you converting to come up with a map, so to speak?
Well, we had effectively kind of grayscale images, so they different shades of grey. But if you imagine that the surface is made up of a uniform material, then the brightness of the surface, the changes in brightness of the surface will tell you something about the slope of the land. So if the land is sloped towards the illumination source, the sun in this case, then it'll be brighter than if it's tipped away. And so you can convert those brightness values into slopes, and you know how big a pixel is, so you have an angle and a distance, and so you can work out the change in height.
So you give it an algorithm that would plow through this stuff, saying, what is that pixel? Okay, that's got to be, let's say this. And you can sort of tweak it, I guess, if something looks really weird, you can.
Yeah. I mean, where you found, because there's obviously impact craters on Ganymede as well, so they would then spew out much brighter material, which would mess up the algorithm a little bit.
Wow.
But for the larger scale structures, sort of, you could see the effects of the crust stretching and shrinking, and where you get big faults occurring, and we could see these valleys and horsts and grabens, they're called.
So you're like you're like one of the first people, you're literally like the early internet, watching those images slowly show up. And
it's arrived by tape.
Oh my God, really?
Yeah.
Oh wow.
A postman arrived at the office with a tape, yeah.
How long did that take to load? God, tape's a nightmare.
Well, I had to walk it over to the computer center. We didn't have computers on our desks at the time.
Oh, the big AC units.
Yeah, big building, and then I had to book the tape in, and then book a time when the computer technician was going to load the tape onto the system.
Oh my God!
And then I had to be sat there ready to go when the tape came on. So
it is extraordinary. I still remember having an argument, and now I've obviously lost the argument, where this kid said, "Oh yeah, my dad's buying a computer." And I was like, no, he's not. No one can afford a computer. Yeah. It's a giant room. What are you going to do? Put it in your living room? And it's like, no, it's going to be in the living room. I was like, no. I couldn't conceive of the idea. Okay, so you're looking at Ganymede. Again, we're looking away from Earth right now. But but you're getting to do the stuff you're doing on Earth on other planets.
Exactly. Yeah.
That's gotta be quite a kick, though. Like that's gotta be a pretty
Yeah.
great
No, that
feeling.
was brilliant. I mean, I would have liked to have continued with that direction, but it didn't come to pass, so I had to do something different.
How does that work? How did you get it, and how did you lose it? Like, how does that work?
The project was set up through my bachelor's degree, and so my supervisor, one of my lecturers, one of my professors, he'd set this up, and so he said, if you want to do this, we can get you an image, and etc. Wow. And so I did that as a summer project. But then afterwards, it was about finding a sort of, a course that I could then sign up to and continue. And there wasn't quite the same level of number of courses around as there are now.
Right.
A lot of the work would have involved going to the US, and so it was much more difficult.
Oh, horrible! What a nightmare!
Get a comics to the US. And I know that at that point I had to send letters and wait.
Oh, that's true. Yeah.
It was.
But you could have been in Pasadena. They got the JPL there. It's a pretty amazing place.
Well, that was a highlight of my PhD when I presented in the von Karman Auditorium at JPL. Oh. So that's a few steps along in my career, but.
We visited. We had a Stargate friend, as I would call them, who got us in for a tour, and oh my God, I was just in my element. They were doing, I think it was Curiosity they were building at the time or testing.
Okay.
Yeah, just what an extraordinary place. It almost burnt down. They.
Yeah. I saw that.
So all that climate data, they may want to start using it to track. Well, that's a question. I'm assuming wildfires must have. People are going to want data on that as well, I assume, right? Yeah,
I mean, it's not a direct area of expertise of mine. I mean, we do map burn scars as part of the land monitoring that we do, but certainly one of the first sort of Earth observation course I did, it wasn't wildfires, it was human fires I ended up mapping.
Oh, really?
In the UK, we used to have I think they called it straw burning or waste burning, and so. They would then burn that, and it would, make so much smoke it would block roads and close airports and stuff like that. So, for a project, then I looked at how we could monitor that from space, and so do daily records of all these fire occurrences.
Yeah, you just reminded me. My granddad ran a clinic, and they used to burn the trash out the back. There was a big bin that they would just set on fire, and that just seemed like the normal.
Yeah.
Again, it's a bit like the oceans, isn't it? Because we don't see the air, we just, whatever's in it, we don't see it. Same thing with the oceans. We just throw stuff in the oceans, assuming that it's just going to, it'll absorb it. It's fine. No worries.
Yeah. It has been absorbing. And it might be stopping.
Yeah, exactly. It's done.
But the whole process of mapping from fires from space, I mean, that's a really good use of Earth observation because the fires themselves have a really strong signature that we can pick up from orbit.
Were you picking up heat, or are you picking up the smoke, or what would you pick up?
Well, you pick up both. So it depends what wavelengths you're looking at. So as the fires are in much more the longer wavelengths in the thermal infrared, as they call it.
Right.
And then as you move closer to visible, things actually get hotter. So that's why visible light comes from the sun, which is extremely hot. And as you move away from visible light, things tend to get cooler. So the fires I was looking at I was using a kind of what's called mid-infrared. It's about 5 micron wavelengths.
How small a fire could you track? Like how big a?
Well, it was more there to do with the satellite system and its pixel size. So I was using weather satellites, which had a 1 kilometer pixel. But often a small fire within a 1 kilometer pixel would still have a strong enough response for it to be detectable.
Oh, wow.
So, it didn't have to be a kilometer by a kilometer.
How big a fire are we talking about? Like what?
I mean, probably, 100 meters. Imagine a fire front moving across a reasonable sized field. So you'd pick that up.
We don't even have to imagine anymore. It's just on the news.
Yeah. I mean, that's the shocking part of it.
Okay,
observation can pay a lot in that kind of situation.
Well, this is it. I'm just assuming that this has got to be like a booming industry because you've got. I mean, England, you've got floods, you've got droughts, there's all this kind of stuff has got to be. We need the data to be able to figure out what to do about it, right?
Yeah. Well, emergency response is one of the key drivers for. Particularly the Copernicus program in Europe. It has one of its service components is emergency management. And they activate quite regularly where they'll, as soon as an event happens, a flood, or earthquake or something, or fire, they get requested to activate, and then they'll start producing maps,
Right.
both pre-event maps, so you can see what the situation was just before the incident, and then they will then track an event as it progresses. So each time they get a new image, then they'll produce a new situation map, which they then feed out to the emergency responders.
But it all has to be generated because it's just raw data until...
Yeah.
Right.
And the thing is, you need to have a team sitting there almost, ready to go.
Right.
So so there's this service in Europe, kind of basically sits there until something happens. I mean, at the moment, there's so many things happening in the world that they probably don't have too much downtime.
Yeah, I'm sure. Sure.
Because also when after the event, when you can monitor the recovery as well. So that's still part of the event response.
Wow. I mean, it is amazing that it just makes absolute, like economically, it makes so much sense to be looking at us as opposed to out into space, certainly for now. But okay, so keep going. So you've done Ganymede. And then what pushed you on there? You got olive oil olive oil. Obviously, I'm in breakfast mode. Oil and gas wasn't working for you because it was just too cheap, I guess, at the time. Is that?
Yeah, I guess so. Yeah, I'm kind of glad now.
Yeah, it's kind of. Yeah, I think that was a fortunate. That was a happy accident, I think. And so, where did you go then instead of that?
And then, I did this like a master's course with the straw burning, and then I did a PhD where I looked at the health of forests. So we use something called imaging spectrometer, which is like a camera with hundreds of different colors. Effectively, it breaks down light into 200 sort of different wave bands rather than just red, green, and blue. And we were using that to look at the health of forest canopies, because that then controls nutrient cycling and therefore carbon uptake, and so it's part of the sort of vegetation modeling.
So depending on the colors you get returned, you get a sense of what's happening.
Yeah, we were looking for certain components in the leaves which actually control breakdown in the soil. So some cellulose breaks down really easy. Lignin is slower, so if you have more lignin than cellulose, you'll then get a slower turnover of nutrients in the soil.
So this is for agriculture of some sort, or?
We were looking at forests at the time. And we had a field site in Florida where they'd effectively treated some of the plots to give them a different response, and we used a camera actually flying in a U2 or XU2.
Oh, cool!
ER2,
yeah.
At 20 kilometers, which is kind of then simulates being in space without being in space.
Right.
So we flew over the site, and then we used these spectra to try and identify these proportions of different molecules and chemicals in the canopy, and then other people then use that to then say, okay, in this forest we're likely to get X amount of carbon sequestered, etc.
What? So I can't get my head around how are you getting, like, if you're flying over, in a stealth bomber, how are you getting the data like so quick? These incredibly sensitive. I guess they're incredibly sensitive sensors. I mean, how do you?
Yeah. I mean, one of the aspects of this type of approach is that the various bits of the sensor have to be cooled down to certain temperatures to make them sensitive enough to, because you're only getting, as you say, you're moving over so quickly, you're only getting small instance with which to capture the light and measure it. So that everything has to be pretty high performance, and at the time the amount of energy requirements, etc., you'd need to put one in space was too high for the costs of launching stuff into space then. But now the Copernicus program is about to launch an imaging spectrometer. So as I approach the end of my career, the technology that I was working on at the beginning of my career is about to get launched into orbit. So they're building that now.
So they used to have to put it in a plane because it was too bulky. Now they've got it on. Now it's going to go in a little what is it, a little shoebox, or is it a giant? Is it a
Well, it'll be a 2 or 3 refrigerator.
Oh, okay. So
it'll be. It won't be a tiny little CubeSat. It'll be on I don't know, a sensible sized a desk or filing cabinet at least sized.
Why are they like so? So what's happened? Is it just the miniaturization of the components that's made it possible, or the cooling, or what's the breakthrough?
Power requirements, sensitivity of the detectors, etc. they use. So all the technology is improved.
Yeah, and I guess the power is a huge thing, isn't it? Because we've got written now where everything runs on 5 volts now. It's like ridiculous.
Yeah. Exactly. Yeah.
Okay, so we're doing that, and then what? What did you get to after that?
Yeah, and then after that, I then went and sort of changed tack slightly from being at the cutting edge of science to then doing more kind of production type work. And so I then took over producing land cover maps, which are these management maps of the UK. So I then joined a UK agency, and we have a program there of producing these maps at regular intervals. And so
to track the green spaces and
for land management and implementation of government policy. Make sure that people aren't doing the wrong thing in the wrong place or deciding where to do new developments, all that kind of stuff.
And you were
accounting
saying
for how much carbon is being sequestered, etc.
Oh, really? Oh, so and what? Just based on how many sort of trees you're seeing, or are there other ways to?
Yeah. You can you add up how much forest of a certain type, and then it has a score about how much carbon it will absorb per year, etc.
Wow. So okay, so you also said something else last time we spoke, which I thought was interesting, was that how we classify these different areas of land is very important. Like for a long period of time, as you say, we were like, oh, that's mountain, that's forest, and there's just a line and that's it. Whereas now we've fuzzied the edges on this stuff. So your maps have changed.
Yeah, this is another step away from that paper map paradigm.
Right.
So now, because we can now attach multiple bits of information to each feature on the map. So in the past, you could only have one color. Occasionally, people would put a color and then a little symbol over the top, maybe.
Yeah, little lines to show that it also. Yeah, that's right. Yeah.
Is it deciduous or is it? Forest?
Oh my God, I remember making those maps in school.
But we can add as much information as we want. If we think of a database where it's just an item in a database and it'll have a geometry, which is its shape and position. And then all the other attributes and bits of information you attach to it are limitless, really. You can put whatever you want there.
Right.
And so now we've moved away from this, giving it one color, giving it one label, which we call classification. We're now moving towards characterization, which is where we try to describe the complete character of an area. So you can imagine a forest. Yes, you might want to call it forest, but you might want to know how closed the canopy is. Is it 100% closed, or are there gaps? How high the trees are? Are there different species there? Are there bits of bare ground? Is the water there? And we know there are certain things that look a certain way from space, but we don't necessarily see what's underneath. And so, like flooded forest, for instance, that's more difficult to map because from space you see the trees.
Right.
And you're not sure whether it's flooded or not. You have to look for some indicator of that flood. So it's a way of describing landscapes in a much richer and powerful way. And then, so back to this sort of carbon sequestration thing, then you can be a lot more precise then, rather than just say, we've got 20,000 acres of forest. You can then say, okay, within this 20,000, so much is a particular species, it's a certain age, there's a certain density of those trees, and therefore your estimate of the biogeographical processes there can be much more accurate.
And how are you getting that? How, for example, would you know it's this type of tree as opposed to that type of tree, other than an obvious, for a leaf system that's similar, are they giving off different things that you're getting from them or something? Or
there's certainly, some of them do have different spectral characteristics. So there's these different colors that are very subtle, but we can now pick up with these better sensors that we have. But also they have different phenology as well, which is how they change over time. So now we're in this domain we might touch on later about having lots of imagery. This deluge. We get more imagery per year, so we can now say, okay, well, this particular group of trees began to green up at a certain time. Or began to senesce at a certain time, and we can use that to then, we know what the phenological patterns of different species are, so we can use that as another bit of information.
So they're all just little clues that help you sort of specify what they are. Wow.
All together.
So, and you said there's you got a new satellite going up with the using spectral analysis, not spectro, no, not specto, spectral. That was my spelling mistake before. What's on the horizon? Like, what's the new? Are you excited about any? I mean, obviously that's an exciting one, but I mean, what's the next? Where do you think what's the next steps for something like this?
I think it's this the movement towards what I call sort of monitoring of landscape processes. So again, another step away from paper maps. So
right,
really dynamic.
Well, you've really got it in for paper maps, don't you?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Do you know, I actually love them.
I was going to say, I could imagine you at home with all these like framed maps of like.
I could stare at them for hours.
Yeah, yeah. I always I loved maps. But I could get lost in a box. So they actually made a movie about it. So there you go. I was lost in a box. Yeah.
So now with this, we're now getting more systems flying that are giving us more regular updates to the surface. So we can set, because in the past when I started doing land cover maps of the UK, what we wanted to do was get one image in winter or spring and one image in summer, so we could see this difference between leaf on, leaf off, or bare fields and crops, etc.
Right.
And then we'd use that to try and produce our maps.
Right.
And it was quite challenging then. There just wasn't enough data around. But now we have this data deluge. But we can almost get data on a weekly basis for free from the Sentinel constellation.
Which I just love the name, because every time you say it, I feel like, the Sentinel. Yeah.
Yeah. That's standing guard over the environment,
exactly.
maybe.
Well, they are. No, it's a valid name. Yeah.
Well, sorry, interesting in a digression, but Copernicus was originally called GMES, Global Monitoring for Environment and Security.
Oh.
But prior to that, it was actually called Global Monitoring for Environmental Security.
Oh,
so it was just going to be a constellation of satellites to securely protect the environment. The word "and" got added in, so they could then do what you call more conventional security.
Right.
Application.
Yeah, I could see a lot of politics going on in there. A little back.
Completely.
Yeah. Well, I guess you got to pay for it too, right? I suppose, and that's
someone's got to pay for it.
Yeah, and if you can come up with a warlike reason for it, that's always going to throw some more cash your way.
I think they call it defense, though, not attack.
Oh yeah, you're right. Yeah, right. Defense, of course, right. So you raise an interesting point there, because this is like film. This is like the progression of film, where we took a bunch of still images and stuck them together, and you got this very jerky kind of almost stop motion like capturing of the world. That's similar to your data's coming in once a year. That's pretty slow footage. But now you're saying if you could be doing it, once a week or once a month or whatever it is, that you're now moving at 24 frames. It now looks more real.
Yeah, exactly. And so we're now seeing these processes like the greening up of forests. We can see them green up. We can see crops appear in the ground. We can see wetlands changing their water levels over time, driven by various processes. Sediments along the coast being stirred around by wave and tide action. We can monitor that, and then, from a theoretical point of view, you can then start to understand these processes better.
Right.
But also, if you know the process is happening, you can then respond much quicker to an issue.
Right.
Because in the past, we were always playing catch up, really, where, for instance, in the Amazon, you get an image and the trees had gone.
Right. Yeah.
They've gone. Okay, well, we know that.
Yeah.
But now you could actually say, okay, we can see logging roads being driven into these areas. So it then gives you an early warning of something that's likely to happen. So, a road appears, then people start felling trees.
Right.
So you can go and make a response to that without waiting to 6 months later when all the trees have been chopped down or whatever.
Which is going to change the mentality of people doing that kind of stuff too, isn't it? Because if you think it's like, well, we apologized afterwards, that's fine. Yeah. Whereas now, if you can actually sort of get them before they do it, it would be. There was a group of very old trees in Toronto that were sitting on a plot of land that they wanted to build a grocery store on. And they were completely stymied because they had these massive old growth trees sitting in the middle of Toronto, and then one night they accidentally cut them down. And it was just better to go for them. It was better for them to just go like, oh, God, I'm so sorry. Yeah, we got cross signals. Yeah, we'll pay the fine, obviously, but now they could build their grocery store. But I guess if that's happening on an Amazonian scale, that becomes, you want to get in there before they do. And then who would look after that? Like, if you get that kind of data, is that people I guess it would be people who are already looking for that kind of stuff. You're not having to call someone and go like, hey, my satellite went over and I see a road.
Yeah, well, the actual kind of the land administration organizations in those countries then are becoming much more aware of this technology. And
right.
Certainly in Brazil, there's an organization called INPE, and they've been at the forefront of developing lots of Earth observation technology just so that they can use it for monitoring their own environment. So I think I think we're still on the upward curve of getting more agencies involved in actually doing this and being proactive.
It's not the first thing you think of. I mean, like as a normal, just as a regular nerd, it's not the sort of thing where you go like, oh, we should get satellite data on this. Like it's not. It's become a commodity that I think is that is. Well, it just wasn't available before. No one would have thought of having it.
Yeah, completely.
It seems
wasn't
expensive.
On people's, it wasn't on people's radar.
Very good. Right. Look at that. The nerd puns are starting already. See you later. We're settling right in.
But I think that's one of the issues, with Copernicus, that I think they then, the people who put that together, there was actually a group of people who met in a place in Italy, and they signed something called the Baveno Agreement, I think it was called, or statement, where they said they were going to set up Copernicus or GMES. Mm-hmm. But the whole idea there was to have this stuff continuously happening. In the past, the satellite would be launched, we would use it, and then maybe if something went wrong, you'd may have to wait a decade for the next one to get launched to replace it. But Copernicus said, no, we can't do this. It's got to be continuous, sustainable, and it's got to have some kind of redundancy in it. So that's why with the Copernicus satellites, there's always two of each kind flying.
Ah, smart.
So in case one goes wrong, there's still another one.
Yeah, because you don't want those holes in the data.
Yeah, exactly. When you're looking at time series of climate change, if there's a missing bit, people can say, oh, well, X, Y, and Z happened in that bit. And actually, quite recently, a couple of years ago, one of the Sentinel 1 satellites, which is a radar mission, actually failed. And
permanently failed?
Yeah, they had some kind of, I'm not sure if it was like a sort of power problem on board, but but then
it's always a power problem. Judging by Stargate, it's always
another one.
Yeah.
They've launched another one to replace it, so now they're back up to 2 missions again. So
wow,
so there's a continuous stream of these into the 2040s, maybe 2050s. You've got this data source coming in, and you don't have to worry about it not arriving because there's enough redundancy in the system to cope with it.
And your hope was not so much for new types of sensors as it was just more of them, like so that you could have
and
get up the resolution.
More of an operational. I mean, academia and research is brilliant. It's what we're built on. But if you need to address real world problems and get legislators to write policies that will change the world, then you have to provide them with regular, reliable data. So, the more we can image the Earth and convert that into useful insights, that's perhaps the next bit of what I want to happen. I mean, it is happening to an extent, but that rather than present people like, oh, look, here's some satellite images, they can really help you. You present them with some information that really, works in their domain language and addresses a pain point that they have. So
data visualization has become incredibly important, hasn't it? I mean, it's fascinating. I can lose myself in some of those studies of how there was a wonderful one where they had one of the first examples was during a cholera outbreak in London, I think it was.
Oh yeah.
And someone just thought, what if we just map where all the deaths are happening? And there's the cluster around this one well. That it turned out the water was it just like and that was the whole idea was like they knew what was going on. They saw this death, but until someone stepped back and decided to visualize that data, they couldn't figure out the cause. And I think I think everyone is really good at gathering data. I'm not sure they're so good at presenting it. And I think that's where you come in, right? That's your whole thing.
Yeah.
I mean, So what do you use? What kind of tools are you using? Obviously, maps of sorts, but I mean, is it like live, portals to this stuff, or what do you provide?
Yeah, some of it can be. I mean, I tend to just work because I do a lot of prototyping. I tend to work on just a desktop GIS system, and then
GIS being
geographic information system.
Okay, yeah.
So it's a way of holding images and maps together and combining them. But then I hand over the sort of algorithms and processes to other people who then implement them operationally.
Wow.
And a kind of a step that I feel we need to make is to kind of, like I said, not give people imagery. I mean, a politician is not going to be able to deal with, so many petabytes of observation data.
Yeah.
But
the facts.
There's these things. Well, I call them intermediate products. Various satellite companies call them analytics layers.
Right.
But they're kind of really basic properties of the surface that we can reliably produce. But they're often then in the language of the person who needs to make a decision. So if it's, area of woody vegetation or tree height or standing water, expanses of water, even a flooding case, you don't want to give somebody a radar image made of backscatter values.
Right.
You want to give them, this is water, this is not water, or this is the depth of the water, etc.
It's storytelling, basically. You're
completely,
the story that they in a format that they'll understand.
Yeah, definitely.
And is this something? You've gone off on your own now. Like this is your own consultation. Was there a reason for that? Was that just like you wanted to kick back a little bit, or you wanted to get more into it? I can't get the sense of whether this is going to be more stuff for you to deal with, or.
Well, I was working for a UK government organisation, and they closed my office down. And,
that'll do it.
And I thought, well, maybe I don't want to move.
Yeah. Oh, that's a fair
But
enough.
then I thought I'll try because I was already, as you can tell, I quite like talking. So I was already in quite.
You and me both, buddy.
and so I realised I was kind of I could do all the things that I enjoyed most doing.
Right.
From my job was the consulting side, the talking to people, find out what their pain points were. What's the potential solutions, how we can apply things.
And you can choose when to deal with the government instead of having to go in every day and deal with them.
Yeah, exactly. That does help. Being my own boss, I always say that I take all the credit for my successes, but I know who to blame for my failures.
Exactly. Yeah. It's an interesting. The trying to come up with a job with something you love is always tricky because you've got to be careful you don't just hire yourself.
Yeah.
Don't you? Right. I mean, because otherwise you're trying to run a business and do the job you love. All you've done is just tripled the amount of work you have to do. Is it just you, or do you have a team, or is it like you just bring people in as you need them type thing?
It's just me at the moment in this organisation, but there are quite a few people in a similar situation to me. Sort of very small companies, maybe between 1 and 10 people, and so we often collaborate. So I rarely bid for work as myself.
Oh,
just
great!
Individually.
Oh, that's perfect.
So everything's collaboration because we all bring different skills and experiences. So we can pull teams together to address particular problems. And so, we're often, mixing and matching all these different groups of people.
That's funny though, because I would have thought it would be. I would have thought people would be more. I mean, data is one of those things that I always feel like people are like sort of like hoarding it away because this is the gold. But you're saying that people are that in this community they're pretty good about. I guess it's trying to save the planet, so I suppose it's hard to do that by yourself.
Yeah, well, I think we're sharing our experiences. People do still hold on to data, hoard it. I mean, that's another good thing about Copernicus, that all the data is free and open access. So
is Copernicus
anyone watching? Go and Google for Copernicus, and you'll find data.
And is it named after? Oh, so that's just available online as well. All that stuff.
Yeah, and all the Sentinel stuff. Yeah.
Oh my God! See this? There goes. There goes the rest of the week. But is Copernicus named after the astronomer because he was the guy who had all the data? Because wasn't he the go-to guy for collecting data?
Well, I'm not sure how much data he had, but he kind of changed the worldview of he made it a heliocentric world that we live in rather than Earth-centric. So he put the sun at the center of the solar system. I often say that Copernicus puts sort of, data at the center of.
That's sort of what I meant. Like it's like he came up with these models because again, like the plague map, he could step back and, having observed it, go, "Oh, wait a second." There's a fantastic book which I recommend to I haven't read it for years, but I remember loving it, called "Coming of Age in the Milky Way," and it's a history of they say of humans changing perspective on the skies, and it starts with us making up stories, and then it gets through. But what I loved about it was that it had little snippets, like little stories about the specific astronomers and stuff, and Copernicus has some just crazy stories, about him and Kepler and a bunch of the other guys. But anyways, if you're into that stuff, it's a fascinating read, I got to say.
But it is interesting they became completely revolutionary and disruptors of the time. Threw things in the air.
Exactly. Well, and there's that. I mean, it's a bit like you talking about going to the temple of the computer to bring your tapes. I mean, there was definitely a sense of that. I remember that and that was my understanding of computers for ages, because computer people spoke a different language, and it's inaccessible, and it's only for people who are crazy brilliant and you can understand computers. It's that sort of fallacy, and I think to some extent people build it up too, don't they? They like to sort of present themselves as that, but it's
well, they do call it a democratization of data now.
Absolutely, yeah.
Data is completely available, so with various things going on around the world, you can Copernicus data will be there, and you can go and find it and look at it. If you want to know what's happening. So
the other
restriction.
The other thing we said about that too was that you can go, by looking back at old data, you can examine it in a different way and make discoveries based on stuff that was that's 50 years old or whatever. So.
Yeah, definitely. And when when some of the mapping that we do, we have we don't use computers for this, but we have interpreters sat in front of the screens looking at old images and current images. And the current one, when the Sentinels came around, we had a step change in quality.
Right.
And but then it's allowed, by seeing the new image, you could then reinterpret the previous image, because you saw where it was now, and then you could make a reassessment of the coarser resolution image from the past.
Right.
And say, that blob there is, now I know what that is.
Oh, right. So that's going to inform all the stuff you've seen before.
Yeah.
Oh, that's
because what we do is, on this particular project, which is called Careen, it's a pan-European map, that when you do an update, you also correct the previous version. So if you can see any problems in the previous version, you edit those first, and then you map the changes.
Oh, wow. Oh my God, that's only going to get better and better and better, the stuff that we figure out.
Yeah. Well, we're now thinking that we may have fixed all the old problems. Do you know what I mean? Like, now we've gone to the Copernicus era, we've kind of, the Sentinel era, sorry. So it's interesting, these sort of things are evolving as well. Even these sort of human processes are evolving.
So you're saying that people are examining these images. So you're not, I'm assuming AI helps to some extent at some point, but you're saying you still, in order to have the AI do this kind of stuff, or you still need humans to make those initial decisions or whatever.
Yeah, well, on two levels. One is that the AI has to be trained, so it has to have some examples for it to work on. But in this case of the Careen map, the sort of classes we're mapping, we're not characterizing them yet, but the classes we're mapping are, they're quite complex in some of their definitions, and so it's really difficult to actually teach a computer, even an AI, to teach them to recognize these classes.
There's nuance.
Yeah, exactly.
It's not so good at nuance. Yeah.
Yeah. But it's the very, if you're looking at very coarse classes, like, I don't know, maybe grass, forest, water, urban, then you're completely fine. But if you're looking at differences between industrial, like what's the difference between industry and a port, or industry and an airport, and golf courses, they're quite tough to automatically map.
Never got into it. They're
a huge combination of things. You have everything from the clubhouse and the car park You have
To
lakes.
the sand
you have-
traps.
Yeah, sand traps. You have different types of grass. You have lots of trees, depending on where you are. So they're really complex things. So if you just say go and find all the golf courses,
Ha.
then even automated systems go and find lots of other things too.
Yeah, it makes sense. Yeah, it's true. It's got to. Yeah, I mean, I'm sure. Look, anyone would find golf courses confusing. Frankly, I've never got into golf. Whoops, myself never got into it. All right, I've gone and lost my image. There you go. Look, I can't believe we've been talking for as long as we have. I haven't gone to questions. I should let our fabulous viewers in on some questions here. We've got Agne, who again, as I say, organized all of this for us and is fabulous, and that's the reason why we're back doing I'm a Genius, is going to send me some questions. And oh, look at that bunch! Oh, tons of them. Oh my God! Oh boy! Ready for the grilling? It'll be fun. Okay. AP Kilby says, I know that the UK has some legislation on space and the use of surveillance. How does that affect your work if legislation is changing all the time? That's a good question. Yeah.
Well, the stuff I work with is relatively coarse resolution, so I tend to work with anything 10 meters and above. So I don't think it falls into that legislation class.
So they're not worried about you peering in people's windows or anything with that stuff?
No, not really. Well, I mean, when you imagine a 10 meter square on the ground, that's the smallest thing we can map, and the way the sensors work as well. 10 meters is kind of like the nominal resolution, but they're actually picking up light from the area around as well, so they're never exactly 10 meters.
Right.
That's just how the image has been chopped up into squares,
right.
etc.
So privacy is not an issue for that?
No, I mean, I must admit I'm not involved in aerial surveys in the UK. I guess there's some legislation that must apply to those. Everything from kind of air traffic control, because they have to fly in certain areas and they're probably told not to fly in certain places as well. I'm not sure. I don't know the details there, so I'll defer to the person who asked the question.
But basically any project you're doing is going to have some kind of a government angle that you've got to make sure you satisfy.
Yeah, mainly. Well, mostly legislation drives it, because when you're working on large areas. But as we're getting more and more imagery coming in, that smaller organisations are picking up on it, like developers and people like that.
Right.
A more commercial uptake. Insurance companies are now looking at using Earth observation data to estimate how much of their assets are in certain areas at risk, etc. Or damage assessment after hurricanes or the fires, for instance.
Oh my God, yeah, that's going to be huge, isn't it? I get this. I was amazed by this, and it didn't work out very well. But I had a roofing quote estimate done, and the guy used a satellite image of the roof.
Okay.
Yeah, he got it totally wrong, but as it turned out. But it was fascinating. I couldn't believe how much information he had on the top of our house, like to the point of like skylight. Then we have these two skylights and a flat section, and he could tell what the pitch was because there were little algorithms that figured all that out. But to the scale of our house, I was amazed at that.
Well, the commercial systems are down to about 30 centimeter resolution from orbit now.
Yeah.
So
but
the only problem is with them, they get a kind of postage stamp kind of. There's a relationship in Earth observation. The smaller you make the pixels, usually the smaller the area you cover. So that's why I work at this 10 meter level, because I can then get kind of national coverage at regular intervals. Where if the guy doing your house had to do, I don't know, every house in Canada.
Yeah, you're right. That becomes very different.
You need a hell of a lot of images to do that, and then
Right, of course.
Yeah.
No, that's great. I mean, it was just amazing to me because I was just like, wow, we are living in the future like that.
Yeah.
And as it turned out, he got the whole square footage wrong. But anyways, there's a whole section of my roof that didn't get done. Okay, questions. Yes. Okay, great question. Thank you, Kilby. That's very good. Amy O'Connor says, any areas harder to map, like over no-fly zones, security bases, etc.? Are there sections that are just blocked out? That you get like a black? No.
Not from satellite. The main problem's cloud. Satellite.
Right, of course.
Living in the UK, it's very cloudy.
I'm amazed there's a map at all. given my summers in Kent.
Yeah. When I first started doing land mapping of the UK, it would take it'd take at least 3 years, and we might not get complete coverage of the UK.
Because that damn cloud is just a little bit off.
Yeah.
Wow.
No, but in the past, they would military installations would be edited out of imagery,
Right.
which is really weird because you just look for the black spaces.
I know, it just seems a little...
You know where the military bases are. I mean, it's
Yeah.
quite comical.
Yeah, there's a little black box in exactly the shape of the fort that they've built. Yeah, I'm sure.
Exactly, yeah, an airport-shaped.
That's right. Well, there was that wonderful story about the Fitbits. You hear about this?
Oh, yes.
Yeah, where apparently you could they'd figured out that there was an army base there because people had been going out for jogs in the morning, and you could see these routes with where all of the training had been done because they all had smartwatches on. So, and probably back then TikTok as well. Okay, so all right, so no fly zone. So cloud. I love the fact that clouds are more of a problem than security at this thing. All right. May I ask? Okay, Kilby again. May I ask if you attended NEOC 2024? I don't know what that is. And if you did, what did you think of the conference? And was there anything that was a great interest to yourself? What is the NEOC? Do you know that?
The National Earth Observation Center. Was it NCEO? National Center for Earth Observation.
Or NEOC. That makes sense.
Okay. Well, if it's the thing in York, anyway, it was a national conference for Earth observation people in the UK. So
I think Kilby's flexing. Kilby's flexing that he was at or she was at the NEOC this year. Yeah.
Yeah. No. Kilby's paper was the favourite one I saw. Then I'm joking. I can't remember. Now, for me, as a kind of a really sad old guy in this community, that I actually go to meet all my friends there.
Yeah, I'm sure.
I spend a lot of time actually not in the sessions. Presenting, so I'm actually out and about chatting to people. Well,
that's the whole point, isn't it? I mean, that's like, look, I'm such a nerd that I love going to conferences and going to the talks because I don't know any of this stuff, and I don't know any of the people. But the more you go, the more you end up just having these groups of people you end up hanging out with, isn't it? It's like,
No, I mean it's great. These events as well, though, are great to bring the community together. I mean. Like this, we do lots of stuff online, but I think there's a certain benefit you get from, all gathering together in a huddle or asking questions after a paper and then realizing that's someone you need to speak to at coffee break or, something like that. So I think, yes, it's a good event and we have them every 2 years in the UK and then in between we have smaller events.
Depending on clouds.
Yeah, that's right. There's always clouds. I think the weather was quite horrible when we were there.
It's got to be. It's got to be pretty. It's got to be quite an isolating gig. I mean, unless you're working unless you've got a whole team working with you, you're basically on your own on this stuff.
Yeah, well, pre-COVID anyway, I used to do a lot more traveling than I do now.
Right.
So
I've given up on traveling.
Go stir crazy in my shed with this kind of stuff, but
did you didn't?
No, I didn't.
No, I didn't either. Honestly, I feel a bit guilty, but my son and I really enjoyed it. My wife hated it, but yeah.
Luckily, that's the thing. I've got a good network of people, and there's not usually a day goes by that I don't have some 1 or 2 teleconferences.
Oh, great. Okay, so it requires a lot of that, anyways. Then.
Yeah, I think you're my second or third today.
Am I really? Oh, wow.
Yeah.
Oh, my God.
Yeah.
You got to be done. Yeah. You're like, all right, already. Okay, so the NEOC, I'll have to check that out sometime. I love the geeky conferences. Not that that's geeky, but I mean geeky in a nice way. That's, just because it's always just, it's a bit like traveling. You can travel as a tourist, and you get sort of a sense of things, which you get if you read the magazines and stuff. But if you actually go to the conferences, you really feel like you get a sense of the culture behind the stuff that's going. So I always love that kind of stuff. Yeah. All right. Sylvic99 asks Geoff, how do you think our conception of reality and truth might shift in the context of geospatial data? Ooh, especially with AI going on. By the way, hi David. First time I could see you live. You're awesome. I like the last part of that question better. Yeah. So what's our conception of reality and truth shift? What do you think?
Well, I think geospatial data helps to support the reality or truth or however we want to call it. Certainly with things like things like the Ukraine war. There was a lot of satellite imagery that was being distributed before that, which contradicted the
Everything that
news stories
Russia
were
was
coming
saying.
out. Yeah, exactly.
Yeah.
So, I mean, so in that way, we support it. In terms of AI, I mean, my only sort of fear with AI is that it does tend to hallucinate a little bit. So I have an example where I was doing some tests and it hallucinated a village where it just kind of a certain thing happened in a field which was not particularly that major, but
Right.
it was obviously enough for the algorithm to think, oh well, this must be houses and buildings, and and it added a little road network and some gardens and stuff to it. And,
Sorry, my son is just off to his
Okay.
his exam, so I'm just gonna wish him well.
Okay. So anyway, yeah. So the issue with AI, I think, is just that as long as we understand how it's working and we have sensible training data for it, and a kind of cross check and sort of feedback loop in it, then yeah, it can add to our perception of of the world, but we just have to be careful that it might not always be telling the truth.
Yeah, it's the thing. I think there's a tendency, we're still in that kind of tech bro phase where it's like it'll do everything, and I think because you see this with film and TV stuff as well, where they're people keep putting out these AI films, and I'm always like, there's no story. Like you need a story. Like that's just edited together clips. It doesn't mean anything. And I guess the same thing happens with the data. If you just stick together a bunch of data, and unless there's a story behind it, it's of no use to you.
Yeah.
And and you need the humans. I mean, I think it's what seems fantastic, and especially with what you're doing. I'm guessing it can really help with some of the grunt work stuff. But you
Yeah, yeah,
still need that.
completely. Yeah.
Yeah.
I mean, it's brilliant at pattern matching, but very but simpler patterns. I mean, as I say, very good at cats and dogs and seeing aeroplanes and cars and ships, etc.
Right.
Because they have very defined features, and then they can be those patterns can then be matched quite accurately. But well, if you then think about something like moorland or biodiversity or concepts that themselves aren't very well defined, and then you try and define them, try and map them with AI, then the biases and the uncertainties that are already in the definitions to begin with then get multiplied or propagated through the AI system.
Could it? I mean, in that if it's good at pattern recognition, then could you not sort of give it a bunch of data and say find similar patterns in this, and then
Yeah.
you go in and look and go like, oh, look at that, it's found all of the whatever. Oh, it's mixed in a golf course or whatever.
Well, that's the link through to what I was saying about these intermediate products, that these basic properties of the surface, like, if we get it to map things like, bare ground, open water, woody vegetation, which it can do very accurately, but then if it has to say something about, I don't know, carbon sequestration or biodiversity,
Right.
then that's a whole level, that's one or two levels of abstraction from what you're actually seeing in the imagery anyway.
And also, you have to
So,
know how to what questions to ask too, right? Don't you?
yeah,
You still
yeah,
need
yeah.
the experts to know what
Yeah.
questions to ask. But
Fortunately.
but by the sound of it, these are gonna become tools that are pretty valuable in this stuff, right? I mean, that's got to be.
Yeah, yeah. I mean, I would like to see, well, I'd like to see a world where AI is doing this, like you say, your grunt work, the heavy lifting of taking petabytes of data and pulling out reliable pieces of information. But then going from information to insights, then that's when you need the domain expertise and local context and experience.
Well, and also the fun.
We have a
I mean,
human.
this is the other thing is there's a wonderful quote that says, "I want AI to do my dishes and the vacuuming. I don't want it to do my art and my writing. I art and write
Yeah.
because that's what I want. I want to do that. Like, I mean, there's a part of it
Exactly.
that you want a human
yeah.
perspective on some of this stuff. Okay, sorry, we're going completely off topic because I'm here. Okay, right, especially AI. So, kill me again. May I ask, what are your thoughts on the growing industry around Earth observation, especially as the bigger space companies are becoming more involved, such as Airbus, Airbus,
Airbrush, I like
Telespazio.
it.
Airbrush.
Yeah, yeah.
This is the problem with being the a jack of all trades, is that I can't get any of the terminology right. Telespazio and Spirosoft. Wow, they're the bigger space companies becoming more involved. Are you getting access to that data, or is that the kind of stuff where the big companies go up and they get their own stuff?
but most of that is the commercial suppliers. But then people like Airbus, etc., will actually help build satellites for Copernicus. So those bigger organisations, they have the whole sort of production line from designing satellites, almost close to launching them as well. So they can be very vertically integrated because of they could launch a satellite, operate it, supply the data, and give the analytics or processing out to people. So there's they can do that, but then you kind of then lack that innovation of the smaller companies coming in. It's not really my field of expertise, but there always seems to be lots of mergers and etc. between these companies that they get absorbed into bigger companies, and they get farmed out or split off and then and operate on their own. So it's a very evolving market and stuff. I don't have trouble keeping tabs on who's working for who and who's linked to who.
But you think it's good to have some indies in there as well, doing some weird little
most definitely. I think because the spin-outs coming out of universities with ideas and stuff. That's
wooden satellites. Do you see the wooden satellite the other day?
I did.
Yeah, I thought that was quite cute, actually. I mean, sorry, cute's the wrong word for it, but just the idea. It's like, well, why does it have to be metal? Like
organic. We could grow them, maybe.
Ooh, there you go. Yeah. Fungal satellites that well, we'll get there. You wait. The biotech stuff. Oh, that was a convention that I had. I went to a biohacking convention. That was amazing. Learned all about myceliums and there was a whole body modding thing, but I'm not into that. I can't get into the putting magnets.
Did you have was it talks about tardigrades? Water bears
no, but I love the tardigrades. One of my favorite things to do in the summer is we always end up renting a cabin with our friends who are entomologists, and he and I spend the entire time just hunting tardigrades. That's all I come in with this whole kit with microscopes and everything, just anything that might work. They're just I am so in love with tardigrades. Extraordinary things. You know that we've crash landed them on the moon already.
Yeah, that's right. Yeah.
So that we may have already, populated the moon. With,
might be crawling around up there already.
Yeah, they're already smarter than we are, I'm sure. But apparently we're not going to the moon. We're going to Mars now anyway. So that's the.
So I heard yesterday. Yeah,
apparently.
The day before.
Did you listen to the?
I tried to avoid it, I'm afraid. I got the headline bullet points,
It's funny. I've been trying to. I mean, I try not to be political at all in any way, shape, or form. But I've just found social media of late. I'm just I do my posts now, and then I do these because I've just found social media in general. It's not even so much what's happening in the world; it's just the responses to it that I just can't get. Anyways, all right. What else we got? K Hellcat. K Hellcat says, if similar technology that Geoff uses can be used to map the deepest parts of the ocean. Deepest parts of the ocean. It's kind of tough though, right? Because it's getting something to penetrate that deep. Is there something that could do that?
Well, I mean, the same types of cameras are fitted to deep sea submersibles.
Right.
But I mean, the problem down there is the light source. And, I mean, there has been ideas and projects about having autonomous vehicles that will just cruise around the deep ocean producing maps.
We spoke to a guy, I think it was yesterday actually, that we're gonna have on here as well, who does as part of many of the things he does that's part of the he's got they've got these sort of buoys that drop to the bottom and take data and then pop back up again, and it's really neat. Yeah. So actually, if you're interested in that, we're actually going to be talking to someone about that very, very shortly. So good question. Kilby, can you explain the differences in observation, such as photogrammetry? Oh, the different types. Okay, the differences in observation that is probably a very smart thing to do because there's many of us who probably don't know the difference.
Photogrammetry, or
just so the different types of data that you're getting. So photogrammetry that's more topographical?
Yeah. Well, that's the sort of process. So when you have multiple images from slightly different viewpoints, then you use photogrammetry in order to work out the three-dimensional structure of the surface. So when aircraft fly along to do surveys, then they do certain amount of overlap between the images. They don't, when they take images, they don't actually butt up exactly. They actually overlap.
Right.
So for the area in between, you're actually seeing it from two different angles.
Right.
The area of the overlap.
And so the more data, the better the image you're going to get.
Yeah, and well,
to a point.
stereoscopic view like our eyes do. It's the
Mm.
same process as working out distance with our eyes. And so photogrammetry then combines those images from different angles into a three-dimensional model. And then because you have a three-dimensional model for the surface, you can then kind of drape the image over a real surface rather than assuming that the image is of a completely flat plane.
Mm.
So
Is that like the
yeah,
UV skinning thing
that's
that
a
they
whole nother
use?
podcast, I'm afraid.
Yeah, that's very similar to. I've been doing a bunch of 3D work in Blender and Unreal Engine, and a lot of it's the same thing where you take these maps that are just dark and light, and that creates the topography. We're trying to make these words right, and then as you say, you drape another thing over it to give it the colors and textures that you want for it.
Yeah, yeah.
It's interesting. Of course, that would. I mean, it makes sense. It's all the same technology, isn't it? So you got that. You've got. Are you using microwaves at all, or what other things are you?
I don't. Yeah, well, so slightly different because photogrammetry is really optical data, so that uses visible light.
It's just
So
basically a giant camera in the sky.
yeah,
Yeah,
yeah.
yeah.
So there's kind of three main parts really. There's sort of optical data which is illuminated by the sun, so that is reflective kind of optics. There's emitted radiation, which is hot things on the surface give off radiation, etc. So you measure that. So and then there's microwave radiation where you have a source which then fires a beam. That's like radar, fires a beam down, and then you catch the return beam. And each of those processes tells you something different about the surface. So the optical reflective is telling you something about colors and pigments within materials. And then when you get to the emitted radiation, that's telling you something about temperature, because different materials at different temperatures will emit different amounts of radiation. And then the microwave is longer wavelengths, and that tends to tell you more about the roughness of the surface,
Ha.
or possibly even the water content. There's something called the dielectric constant, which
Oh, right.
changes with water content.
So you can tell the salinity of the sea and that kind of stuff.
Yeah, that sort of stuff, yeah. And then whether it's a wetland or because it'll absorb some of the microwave radiation will be absorbed by the water content in the surface. But then things like forests, they're very good for looking at forest structure because, a very rough forest will give a different backscatter, it's called backscatter, than a very flat surface. So in microwave images, water tends to be black because the radar beam comes down, the microwave beam comes down, hits the surface, and then bounces off into the distance rather than back at the antenna that it's just come from. So,
and then just based on the kind of responses you get, that's how you figure out what you're hitting.
Yeah, that's right. And so, it'd be great if we could combine them all into one system. It's practically very difficult or maybe impossible. But
you mean
each
like
one of
one
those
satellite? You mean the idea of having it all on one satellite?
Yeah, or maybe there was talk of having a train of satellites.
Oh,
so
yeah.
each one has a different instrument on. And so they would effectively image the same area with these different methodologies. And then you could combine them together. But again, like I was saying about characterization, if you could say, this particular area looks this particular color, it has this temperature, it has this roughness, then you can then start to really describe what that is, and the properties of it. So,
and then what about your new
interesting.
spectral one? What about your new the spectral analysis?
Well, that's sort of optical and going into what's called the shortwave infrared. So it's sort of beyond red. So you go to red and then near infrared, and then and that's going to be picking up the sort of pigments, chemical compositions of surfaces. So the different bonds in molecules, etc. Absorb radiation. So where you get an absorption feature in this spectra. Spectra is just a line, like a graph, with wavelength at the bottom and reflectance up the side. And so where you get a dip there, some of the radiation is being absorbed, and that will tell you something about the chemical properties of the surface you're looking at.
So yet again, more detail to some extent.
Yeah. In the past, it's been used a lot for mineral exploration because you can fly over very large areas and then collect these spectra, and then you convert them into abundances of certain minerals which we know have absorption features at certain places. And then,
looking for gold.
Yeah, well,
Yeah.
probably gold, but all sorts of things like that. So,
Wow. Okay. So but it's basically those three are the main.
yeah, so reflective, emitted, and then microwave backscatter.
Okay.
Um,
And there's
yeah,
nothing.
there's a few other ones,
Right.
fluorescence and stuff, but
Right.
they're quite minor.
Not stuff that you've had to not particularly useful to you.
Well, yes, at times. I mean, I'm not a radar expert. I do most of my work in the optical.
Right.
So I've reflective optical. As I say, I've done some thermal work in the past.
Oh yeah, I guess thermal makes sense too, right?
Yeah, with those straw burning. But also, thermal is now getting more popular again. There was always an issue with the amount of signal you could record with the thermal system because you'd have to cool it again. So it'd have to be. So there was sort of technical limitations. So you'd end up having very big pixels. So to get enough radiation into the system, you'd have a big pixel. So it wasn't so good for mapping, detailed landscapes. But now there are various companies. SatView, a UK company, has launched a thermal satellite, and although unfortunately it had a bit of a failure, but they were launching some more. So,
No.
but the whole thermal thing is now becoming more important for everything from whether your roof's insulated properly to heat sources in the environment and
To whether it's on fire. Is it insulated?
Yeah,
and
yeah,
is it
yeah.
on fire? Yeah.
yeah.
Um,
That's becoming bigger and bigger, I think, in thermal.
oh, I'm sure. I mean, yeah. I mean, we've had our share of them ourselves up here. So, all right, we got. Oh my God, there's still more questions. Are you okay with some more questions? Are you?
Yeah, let's keep
All right.
going.
All right.
Might need a drink.
You go. Yeah, get in there. Look, I've got my giant Yeti mug of. This is all coffee. It's obscene.
Oh,
But it's.
I'm on tea. It's afternoon tea.
Oh yeah, I can't. We start with tea, then we go to coffee, and then we usually go back to tea at the end. Okay, I'm not sure if you'd actually be able to mention it, but as you mentioned, observing Europe, are there certain areas that are off limits for yourself or civilians? Everyone's like me is always concerned about what you're not allowed to look at, like such as the Ukrainian peninsula. So is there stuff you just don't get given, or no? They're basically.
Well, as far as I'm aware, Copernicus has no restrictions on if it's in the archive. It was collected, it's in the archive. You can look at it.
Right.
I know certain countries limit some of the commercial providers. I'm not sure. Don't want to say in a particular country because it was. I remember this from the past anyway. Certain countries wouldn't let a data supplier sell imagery of their country. If you see what I mean. So,
and that would stop them. They'd had that. I guess so.
Yeah, well, I don't know. There's obviously some commercial controls there. I'm not sure, but
Here's a question for you: if it's collecting data and then beaming it down, is it encrypted? Like, is there anything to stop someone from futzing with it?
I have no idea actually.
That's just an interesting idea.
I do know some ground station people that I could ask.
It would just be interesting to find out because
yeah.
I mean that's very James Bond, but the idea that you could, because I mean if I was a Putin, and I want to mess with people, you could start faking data.
Well, yeah, I mean, I guess so. I mean, and that's some of the stuff that's happened with GPS is dithering signals and stuff to make sure other people don't use them. So, that's a very good question because I mean they may encrypt it just because everything will then get compressed and packaged up for download. So they, for whether they actually encrypt it or whether it just gets put into a bundle to. So, because what happens with the Sentinels anyway, when they come over various ground stations around the world, they will dump off all their images that they've collected.
Right. But there's nothing more than compression on it, really.
Well, yeah, I'm not sure. It's a very good question. But what then people were saying about the areas, I mean, some of the satellites do limit the areas they collect for practical reasons, whereas because Sentinel-2 only acquires data over the land surface, and I think it's maybe 200 kilometers offshore.
And is that just their field of view? Is that just what they're...
No, I think it's just because the open ocean, they'd be recording lots of... I mean, you imagine over the Pacific, there'd be tons of stuff that's just...
Yep, still ocean.
The open ocean.
Yeah, right.
Because we have the Sentinel-3 system is coarser resolution, but is on permanently. So when that's much better. If you're looking at the Pacific Ocean, you don't need 10-meter resolution.
You get the idea.
Yeah, 300 meters is completely fine, and you can see where the temperature patterns are, or the chlorophyll patterns in the water,
Right.
etc.
Yeah,
so
of course, you could see
Sentinel-2
the
does
algae
that.
blooms and all the things. Yeah.
So Sentinel-2 limits itself to mainly the land surface and little islands and stuff it will record.
But that's not political. That just makes more
Yeah,
sense
it's
for the data
practical.
collection. Right.
And then with some of the radar satellites, because they fire their own beam of energy down, of radiation down to get scattered back, they have power constraints, so they're not always on all the time. So they will have an acquisition plan where they aim. The thing with radar is that it will go through clouds, so radar doesn't get affected by clouds. It does by rain to a degree.
Right.
So they know they will be able to get an image on every pass.
Right.
So they can then use their power efficiently.
As they need to, right.
Yeah, it charges up when it's on the sun side of the Earth, and then when it goes into the dark side of the Earth, they can still keep collecting images, but they then don't have any recharge capability, and then they come back around again.
Are these manually done? Like, are they manually choosing when to do this stuff? Or I mean, I guess some of it's obviously automated, but I mean, is it for the most part? Is it sort of like locked in when the satellite goes up, or do they have a flexibility?
The orbit will be pretty much fixed. They are able to move them slightly for avoidance of other satellites.
Yeah, it's got to be hard finding parking up there now.
Yeah, there's a lot of gear up there.
Yeah.
But then they will have in advance there'll be an acquisition program, so they'll have certain controls over that. So it will generally run automatically, I think, as far as I'm aware. But then, like if there's a certain incident in a certain place, they might be able to redirect.
Right. Okay.
So okay, we actually need to take that more often. And the commercial radar companies, that's one of their USPs. Selling points is that they can then really target stuff. So because you're paying for it, so you say I want an image of a certain place 3 times a day, and that's the deal. They will go and get it. You know.
Is this data expensive? I mean, I have no idea what the kind of I guess it depends on the data.
Yeah, on the data, how quickly you want it. You know, if you're prepared to put into an acquisition plan and acquired as and when, then it's much cheaper. So, a price of satellite imagery, I don't really want to go there. It's a bit of a minefield of, you have to negotiate with the data suppliers.
Oh, really? Is that part of your job? Is that part of the stuff you have to deal with?
And sometimes. That's why I use Copernicus so much.
Right. Well, yeah, of course. If you got free it just makes sense. Wow. So I guess it's just they've not standardized on a pricing model then yet.
No.
That does sound like a nightmare.
I recommend you get a sales guy on here and give them a grilling. That could be an interesting.
Actually, that'd be find out how do you sell selling satellites. Kilby's got a couple more for you.
Okay.
Was wondering if your observations are put forward to bodies such as Ordnance Survey.
Oh yeah.
What is Ordnance Survey?
It's the National Mapping Agency of the UK. They're very famous. Ordnance is like obviously ammunition.
Yeah,
and so they were the survey for. They were set up during the Napoleonic Wars for mapping the south coast of the UK.
Wow.
So
thus Ordnance, when they literally were, Where do you want to point it?
Yeah. And also, interestingly, a lot of their mapping symbols are things you can hide behind. So it's so they tend to map things where you can hide armies or like woodlands and stuff like that, or things that are difficult to walk across, like swamps and stuff like that.
Oh, that's fascinating. So they were just basically different priorities.
Yeah. So whereas a lot of the map is white because that's just fields and almost they're less military significance. But anyway, so the Ordnance Survey is the UK's national mapping agency, and they're brilliant, and they produce some great maps which I love looking at. Right. If anyone's on the call from the Ordnance Survey, but they tend to work at very high spatial resolutions because they are mapping down to very detailed levels because they are the national reference source for boundaries.
Is that open as well? Is that stuff people could just look at?
There's some stuff that's open, but if you want the really detailed stuff, you again have to pay for it.
So you're just basically paying for the photos or the that you need.
So the map works. So they will draw the lines and the kind of digital paper maps.
Oh, I see. Okay, all right. Yeah. So again, they're visualizing the data for you.
Yeah, and they do a lot of stuff from aircraft. There's lots of aircraft surveys they use, and more they're using satellites. And occasionally, I've been to speak to them a few times about Copernicus and the sort of mapping that I do. So I'm engaged with them. But
is there is there a benefit? I mean, sorry, the obvious benefit of satellites, yes, but would it still be better for some of the data to be just flying a plane around getting the stuff?
Yeah,
It'd be closer.
You can get better spatial resolution. You can control when you fly, but then weather can also interfere with that. I mean, satellites always come around at the same time every day, approximately.
Right.
So they're in a very consistent orbits and acquisition plans. Whereas if you want to fly a particular area at a particular time, then it's best to do that with aircraft.
What about balloons? Could you do balloons? I mean, could you, like, if you wanted to just like track a certain area, couldn't you just put like a
You could do,
like a weather balloon of some sort?
People have done balloon, well, this is called remote sensing, it's just another name for Earth observation, but balloon remote sensing and kite remote sensing, where
cool.
you fly a kite up with a camera on the bottom and it points down and takes a picture.
Well, it's just so cheap. I mean, I mean, the balloon thing has always been...
The problem is if you've got a kite, then the camera is swinging around and, it may not be pointing vertically down, and so there's... so what you save in the acquisition, you then spend in post-processing.
Right. And you only have to lose a couple of kites and get told off because you've killed a cow or something with your... Yeah. All right,
but that's where drones are becoming super popular. I mean, if it's a small area, small urban developments, they're often flown regularly by drones.
It's extraordinary, isn't it, the data they can get from that.
So, and they can then do all this photogrammetry stuff from the drone images, and something called structure from motion, where you can take a video and you can convert it into three-dimensional structures and stuff. So lots of super exciting stuff there. But
seriously,
if you wanted to do the whole of the UK, you'd need
a lot of drones.
100,000 drones or something.
Right. Well, eventually, I mean, I guess we'll get there eventually, probably, won't we? I mean, the reality is they're getting cheaper and cheaper. And I think there's been huge advances in drone technology, unfortunately, also because of wars in Ukraine and stuff like that, too. So,
and when the drones will start crashing into the flying cars, and
a drone hit one of our Canadian air bombers in
oh, really?
In LA. Yeah, they were sort of saying like, oh, for God's sake, don't fly your drone, because of course everyone's like, I got to get some shots of the damage, and it's LA, so everyone wants to film everything anyways, and themselves. But it actually hit one of the planes. It was fine.
Wow.
But it's amazing.
Could have been worse.
There was a hole. I mean, there was definitely a chunk missing out of the front of the plane.
Wow.
It must have been a fair-sized drone, I got to say.
Yeah.
All right, observation thing. And then how about Kilby? Entities such as the BBC Natural History Unit have used the data, and they're filming shows such as Planet Earth. May I ask if entities such as BBC Natural History Unit have used the data when they're filming shows such as Planet Earth?
As far as I know, they do. If you look in the bottom corner of the image, they tend to credit whoever they've got their imagery from. And they tend to take it from whoever's the most appropriate. Like if they're looking for, I don't know, whales in the Southern Ocean, then it'll be one of the commercial high-resolution satellite operators. But if they're tracking the Gulf Stream or something, or temperature changes in the Atlantic, then it's probably Copernicus or NASA or NOAA in the US that they go for that data.
And then one more. He's got one more for you. Okay. Do you think AI will play well, we sort of touched on this, will play a pivotal role in the future of Earth observation, and how do you think it will change the industry and technology? We've sort of touched on this, but...
Yeah, I mean, it definitely will, and it certainly is. I mean, I speak to lots of people who describe themselves as, we're using AI and Earth observation to solve blank.
Everything's AI. I know.
Fill any word you like in there. I mean, so it'll always be there. I think what we need is just more thought about how it's deployed. I mean, there are certain physical processes of how Earth observation images are collected. They're not measuring the things that we see with our eyes. Our human brain is super good at interpreting views that we see, etc. Whereas satellites, they even a 10-meter pixel. You think about a 10-meter pixel moving across an urban environment. Virtually every one of those pixels is going to be mixed in some way. So you're collecting mixed signals and mixed signatures, etc. So I think, yes, use AI, but we use it where it's appropriate, and use it where you've got rigorous training and validation data.
Use it as a tool, not an oracle, too. I mean, it's probably a better...
Yeah, if you talk to a lot of the AI guys, I mean, they're saying that the problem is, how do we get hold of appropriate training data. Because when you need millions of, I can't remember what they call them, pairs of tokens or something, when you need millions of those to train your model, then we don't have millions of, sample points on the ground where people have characterized them with a view to Earth observation. Even ecological surveys, people throw a 1 meter quadrat into a field or something and maybe count the plants in that 1 meter quadrat. There's
and
not
then
like
base their observations on averaging that or something sort of?
Yeah. And then you think, well, that's not a 10 meter quadrat. It's not,
But once you've done that a few times, the AI could then do that for you, couldn't it? I mean, like once you go like, okay, I've looked at that little quadrant and I can tell you what's in there, find the same ones and add them up.
Yeah, potentially, but then again, the Earth observation is not mapping species.
Right.
It's mapping the amount of photons in different wavelengths.
Right.
And it's recorded from the surface, so that's
God. So it's going to be just about. I mean, I was sort of fascinated with the idea of the data deluge, but that really is we're going to have to start. It's not just satellite stuff, right? It's going to be satellites and drones and buoys, smart buoys and submarines or whatever. Like it's going to be trying to pull all this data together. What tools do you use? Like, what are you using? Like R and Python, or what are your day to day?
I tend to let other people write the Python for me.
I'll tell you, AI. If you want to have Python do something for you, I have had so much fun with that, because just using natural language to do what you want, as long as you know what you want it to do, it's very good at writing the programs for you. I've got to say, it's fascinating. So that's something that you hire out that specifically to other people.
Yes. If we do have to do any coding, then we get someone onto the team.
But you've done it because you were on Ganymede. You've already
years ago in Fortran, if anyone remembers.
Right. Yeah. Then this is going to seem like it's like a walk in the park for you. If you know Fortran. Fortran's back again to some extent, isn't it? Because they're finding all these old legacy systems that they don't know what to do with. So I keep seeing Fortran jobs popping up.
Wow, okay, that's
for banks
really
and
interesting
stuff,
to know. Yeah.
And this, one more thing was, oh no, that was it. Oh my God, you've done it. You've plowed through all of those questions. Most of them from Kilby. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Kilby.
For that. That's and I'll just double check. I'll pop on and see if there's anything in particular. Agne's in there. Thrown in, she thinks it's going to play. Yeah, she thinks the AI is going to be used. Yeah, I'm impressed with how clever David is able to discuss all these. Yeah, well, not. I'm with Genius. That's why. Use height maps to generate terrain mesh. Yes, that's it. Akmon. Yeah, that's what I've been doing. We're talking about the terrain meshes. You use height maps to generate. So the same thing happens in all that fabulous, expanse modeling stuff. 2 more questions in email. Okay, there you go. Let me go check. But so all of these tools, it's so funny, are being used to study the planets, and then they're also being used to recreate them for shows like The Expanse. Well, especially The Expanse, because they did a particularly good job of that stuff.
Well, when I was starting doing these UK land cover maps, we developed what was called an object-based approach, where we, instead of looking at the individual pixels in the image, I tried to identify first of all where the fields were, where the lakes were, where the forests were, and then combine them together. And and a lot of that technology came out of medical imaging. So it was medical imaging because they were looking at they call them like slides of biopsy slides, etc. And they were trying to map the different things that they could see there. And so things like image segmentation, a lot of that work was done in medical imaging.
It's so funny. I feel like we've gone. There's a kind of a neat little analogy happening here, where I feel like we started in a kind of a particle world, in a little snapshot world, and it's moved into this. The things all of the edges have all blended, so that the technology in that we're all doing the same. We're all basically mapping, aren't we? Everything we do is just another form of mapping.
Yeah. Well, like you said about images and movies, it's if you take your images fast enough, then you end up making a movie of the Earth's surface.
Yeah, that's amazing. All right, so 2 more questions. K. Hellcat says, Geoff said earlier they could, for example, see the tree line decay or see floods, etc. Could they see forest fires in progress before we see them? Would it be before we see them? I guess it depends if you're standing there.
You could certainly see thermal hotspots.
Like before they ignite?
I don't know. It depends what the ignition temperature of the material is there.
Right. I love talking to scientists because it's
Yeah,
always
there'll
like
be an ignition temperature of the material. So whether we can detect that, I mean, the key thing would be how quickly the satellites come round. I mean, we're very good at a detailed level. We're very good at the preparation type stuff, and then the aftermath. But having a satellite just in the right place at the right time.
So if you had a geosynchronous orbit over LA or whatever, I mean, or a populated area, you would be able to get that data pretty quickly.
You would, but to be geosynchronous, you have to be much farther away.
Right, so you're not going to get the detail. Oh, stupid physics. Right, of course.
It's a multi-dimensional problem, and as you move along one dimension, you move along all of them.
Yes.
So
the more you know about one, the less you know about another. It's always the way, isn't it? And then lastly, what do you think is the next step in satellite technology for Earth observation? I'm going to ask you one more question after this, but it's a sci-fi one.
Yeah. The next step. That's an interesting one.
What do you think?
I think we're covering most of the bases now in terms of the different processes. I said about getting thermal better. I mean, there's an aspect of thermal measurements where you can say something about the properties of the surface. There's a thing called a black body,
right,
which is the sort of what's the word I'm looking for? That produces the energy exactly like the theory. So
the black body radiation thing. That
things aren't really a black body, so they're all slightly different from what a black body would do.
Right.
And the more spectral channels you have in the thermal, you can then say something about the properties of that surface.
Right.
We did a test once looking at sediments in a coastal zone, where you could say something about the density of the sediments by their temperature.
And you think that's technology that we have that's coming up, you think?
I think so. Well, these SatView guys in the UK who are doing these satellites, I've spoken to them a bit about what you need to do is you have to put more. You don't just measure the temperature. You measure the temperature at different wavelengths, and the difference from what is optimal, or what would be the black body tells you something.
So black body satellites you're hoping for next? Is that the...
No, black body. You won't get black body surfaces. You get things that are very close to a black body. But that's what the theory suggests. If you say, how much radiation gets emitted per temperature?
Isn't the black body, wasn't there like a UV catastrophe or something because of this, something wasn't happening right? I can't remember what it was. I think it was something about the creation of quantum. That things showed up in packets as opposed to waves or something. I can't remember. There was something.
Oh yeah, that's quantum physics.
Yeah, we get into that too. It's extraudinary. It's amazing.
Get a physicist on for that one.
Oh, we did. Oh yeah, no, we've had a couple of quantum quantum physicists, and it's amazing. It's just I cannot. It feels like sand. In my hands. I start to get something and then it's like, no, it doesn't make any sense. Thank you so much for doing this. I'm going to grill you about one more thing just because it's always a favorite question of mine. Is science fiction, obviously you are an Expanse fan. Is that the number one sci-fi?
I think it is the number one now. Yeah. I think various things have been number one over time, but I think it's set a new high bar in terms of storytelling and world building, and
the world building is absolutely brilliant, isn't it? Did you read them as well? Did you read the books?
I've read 3 of them.
I've only read the first one. That's it. But I got to get back into them, and I only watched the first couple of seasons. So
there's interesting differences between the books and the shows, and
huge.
That's also interesting in itself to think. Okay, why did they do that? And
Generally because they can't afford it or they ran out of time. That's usually how it works.
Yeah, probably. But I think there's some great aspects of it's a show with lots of powerful female characters in it. And
I worked with Cara. I just did a film with Cara G. I guess a year ago.
I'm so envious. Yeah,
oh my God, she's the best. Yeah. She's like the most kick-ass, scary woman on that show.
Yeah.
And in person, she's just like the loveliest, sweetest, absolutely just adored her. Yeah. Yeah.
That's
I thought I better flex with that. I thought you might get a kick out of the fact that, me and
so
Kara
cool.
G, we hung out in Winnipeg. So The Expanse.
But yeah, and also The Expanse is the science as well. But there's a lot of thought has obviously gone into the fact that, the ships turn around and slow down, and gravity comes on and off, and stuff like that. I mean, that kind of background thinking that you don't normally get.
Yeah, it's definitely feels more grounded, doesn't it? It's not that I'm always loved the Star Wars stuff, but it always felt too fantasy to me. What I loved about the Expanse stuff, and especially the book for me, was just how in depth you get into some of these concepts. And I thought they did a really good job. So as I say, I can only speak to the first couple of seasons. And my friend Bob Monroe was the effects visual coordinator for the first couple of years or a few years. But man, the stuff they're doing is just gorgeous.
Yeah,
really is. But like you say, gorgeous and a story. Because that's
definitely. Yeah.
I mean, we sort of expect gorgeous now. Like all the effects should look perfect. Now, tell me a good story while you're doing it.
I was at Babylon 5. Babylon
really?
5 was my benchmark before The Expanse came.
Really? I never got into. See, I'm so funny. Like I'm a sci-fi nerd who's so limited in the sci-fi that I watch. I'm
I love the story. Oh, sorry, go on.
No. Please.
No, I love the stories where 20 episodes in the future something happens and you go, oh my god, yes.
Yeah.
It's like the writing has been building up that arc to that point, and then you go, oh, of course. That makes complete sense now.
Especially after that era of these shows that pretended that there was some big solution at the end. And there wasn't. Yeah. That drove me nuts. Just crazy. I was a huge X-Files fan, too, which I just loved.
Oh, yeah.
I loved all that stuff. All right. So, and then any new ones you got? I started watching Severance, which I'm loving. But it's a very different. It's not space-based. It's all just a weird space.
I have to go and find something new now. I mean, I've probably watched The Expanse about 3 times now.
Really?
So.
Oh, my God. Okay, I've got to commit some time to it. Well, I'll tell you, I don't entirely love it, but it's absolutely stunning, is Foundation.
Okay.
Foundation is just, I mean, the effects are basically flawless. It's really tough to do that book, those books as a series. I've got to, like, it's an odd choice, but and then people love Silo, and I haven't seen that either. So,
Okay.
Apple TV for some reason has all these, you have to cancel something for a while and do Apple TV.
Apparently we signed up the other day. So.
Oh, did you? Oh, nice. There you go.
One of my kids told me.
Yeah, it happens with the phone too.
Things to look out. Yeah.
And then of course there's all sorts of soccer and stuff you can watch on there now as well. So that's my son is thrilled about that. Geoff, thank you. I can't believe you've done more than one of these chats today because that was just exhaustingly wonderful.
The other one wasn't this much fun, right?
Oh, was it not? Oh, good. Yeah. As long as I'm better than a meeting.
That was planning a workshop at a conference.
Oh, that's got to be fun. What kind of workshops you do? Like how to parse the data or something?
No, it's a workshop about grassland and savannas at a biodiversity conference.
Oh, wow. So, that's going to be... I hope we're more exciting than that to some extent. But, grasslands and savannas have a certain... there's an appeal to that as well.
The only good thing about it is the conference is in Frascati, just south of Rome.
I was going to say, do you at least get to travel? So it's
one of my favorite places, so I'm kind of looking forward to it.
Oh my God, that's fantastic! Yeah. It's always nice when the geeky pursuits also end up happening in a nice exotic location as well.
Yeah,
it's like any excuse to go to Australia or New Zealand. We hop on a plane, happily sell my soul for that.
Yeah.
So
burn some carbon.
So Geoff, how do people get in touch with you? What not that they should be inundating you with questions or anything, but if someone wants to find out more about you, what's the best way to do it?
I'm on Blue Sky at Dr. Geoff Smith.
Oh, you're doing Blue Sky?
One word. Yeah.
How do you like it?
I love it. I'm trying to get away from the other place.
Is it like Twitter used to be?
Yes. Definitely.
Okay. All right.
Yeah.
I just feel like it's another platform, though. I just worry about another.
I understand what you mean, and I was reluctant, but I don't know. There's like a vibe about it that takes you back a little bit.
Oh, good. Okay, because look, I am still mourning Twitter because that's where that's where I get to meet all these amazing people. So all right, I'll give it a go.
Well, lots of the science community seem to be migrating over, even if they still have a presence on Twitter.
Yeah.
There's a lot of people over there now.
Yeah, I reluctantly feel like I have to stay, not just because of the musky element, but it feels like I sort of have to still be there, but I'm quite resentful right now because it just feels like a duty rather than a pleasure anymore. So.
Well, the thing is, we build up communities on these platforms and networks, and it's hard to let them go because until everyone moves.
Well, that's it. Yeah, and it is amazing how many people are on that. I mean, and I still glean the odd fun connection and stuff from the X or whatever they're calling it. But okay, so Blue Sky, and then of course the website, which is fantastic. There's tons of stuff on your website as well. People should check out, which is Specto Natura.
Natura, yeah.
That's it.
.com.
.co.uk.
Com works as well, I think.
Oh, does it?
It's
good.
alien.
Very good.
Yeah.
I also love there's a wonderful data thing happening in the background that it's like which is kind of fun to and I noticed that it changes as you move your mouse as well, which is kind of fun. So.
Thanks to my friend Alistair for setting that up for me.
It's a cool site. Yeah, it's very, very cool. I mean, you kind of have to. I guess you kind of have to have that. Is that how people generally? I guess you've just got enough people in the system now that if something good comes up, they'll give you a buzz.
Yeah. That's. I mean, fortunately, I don't have to do that much marketing, but I do stuff like that. Well, not quite, as I say, not quite as fun as this, but I do webinars for people, and you have people chase up. And at the weekend, I was at a conference in Cambridge where I had a banner, and then
great,
people just came over and started talking to me about this grassland project, and and as I say, I love talking to people, so I made loads of contacts there. So
it's such neat. I mean, it's really neat stuff. I got to say, if someone wants to get into it now, what's their best bet? I mean, is there a good path for this? I mean, the geology thing was a smart, in a weird way, was a very smart way in.
I came through and I did most of my basic training in a physics department, so that was. So we kind of learned everything from first principles. So when I start talking about photons going through four optics onto detectors and stuff, we did all that kind of stuff hands-on.
Right.
Which I think is worth knowing. But many courses now come through geography departments or environmental science departments because it's geospatial information that you use in that sort of geographical context. So,
and you think so? Like a specific course for this stuff is the way to go. That's your.
Yeah. Well, I'd say either do physics or geography, and then specialize in Earth observation.
And play with all that free data out there.
Yeah. I mean, my God, the guys have got it so easy nowadays.
Oh, you kids, you don't know how good you got it. Back in my day, they were flinging tapes out of satellites.
Well, when I did my master's degree, there was one guy who spent the whole summer trying to read a tape. So he had this great project, and he just couldn't read this tape, and so...
Well, he just couldn't get the tape working, or he just couldn't...
Yeah, we're finding out because, it's all different bytes sat on a tape, and so
oh my God.
You have to know what's the header, what's the image.
Yeah, if you don't know where it starts...
Yeah, exactly. So that was...
Oh my God, what a nightmare.
Yeah.
Oh yeah, thanks for leaving us on that. But it's much better now, kids.
Yeah. Thankfully, we have TIFFs and JPEGs. And
exactly.
They're just open.
Well, Geoff, again, thank you so much. You have been so incredibly generous with your time and answering all those questions. You've just been fabulous. And I can't wait to do it again. As you say, there's so many things we can talk about. We just have to do this again sometime. And of course, Agne.
Thank you.
Thank you so much for putting this together. It's amazing. And everyone else, we'll see you next week. We've got a whole bunch of people lined up now. It's Agnes really got me. She's cracking the whip. We got podcasts galore coming up. So until we geek again, I will say be safe, be kind, be brilliant, and cheerio. Thanks everyone.
Bye.
Cheers. And I shall wrap us up. Here we go. That's the chat. I want to stop. As always, it begins and ends with me fumbling to figure out how to use half the technology that I have. So here we go. I will stop our